from Luke chapter 7, 11 through 17. Jesus is traveling with his disciples, and they come into this little city. Soon afterwards, he went to a city called Nain, and the disciples and a great crowd went with him. And as he drew near to the gate of the city, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother. And she was a widow, and a large crowd from the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." And he came and he touched the casket, and the bearer stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak. And he gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they were all glorifying God, saying, "A great prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people." And the report concerning him spread through the whole Judea and all the countryside. Friends, may God bless his reading of his word. And you say, "Thanks be to God." Okay. Anytime that there are two stories in the Bible that are similar, you want to take a look at them and see what God is up to. And of course, what does it mean in my life? That's always the big thing. And this is what's happened this morning in these lectionary readings. One story is from the Old Testament and the other from the New Testament. And there are a lot of questions being answered and asked, and I suppose in each of the stories about how we treat each other, how God treats us, about compassion, about love, about caring about the hard times, and especially how God is with us in all those things. Now, this first story happens a long, long time ago, and it's about one of the greatest prophets in the Old Testament, a man called Elijah. Elijah was a man of God like no other. He was a man who was endowed with incredible spiritual power, but he was also a man who was flawed in many ways. Now, Moses was known for the law. David and Solomon are known for the Psalms and the Proverbs, what we call the wisdom literature. But Elijah, he is known as the head of the prophets. If you remember, when Jesus is on the Mount of Transfiguration, he meets with Moses and Elijah, the head of the law, the head of the prophets. Okay? Now, Elijah just shows up in the Bible just kind of out of nowhere in chapter 17 of 1 Kings. We don't know anything about his early life. He just sort of hops onto the biblical stage and off he goes, and he's in this whole kingship of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. This time period is after David, it's after Solomon, it is after the time where the one nation of Israel has split into two parts, the northern kingdom, Israel, and the southern kingdom, Judah, at this point. And Elijah is sent by God to preach to the king and to the people of the northern tribes in Israel under King Ahab. Now, all of his life, Elijah will have a contentious relationship with King Ahab. And Elijah receives the word of the Lord that he takes to the King Ahab. And he says this, "As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." And that's exactly what happens. There comes a great, great drought. No water anywhere. Now, after this, of course, telling something like that to the king, he runs and he hides, okay? Elijah goes at the command of the Lord. He goes to the east of the Jordan to hide by a brook in a ravine. And the Lord says that there's a brook there. And he gets water out of the brook, and God sends ravens to bring food to him. Wouldn't it be great? God, tells you to go tick off the king, and then he sends you to a little stream, and then he feeds you with the birds. And then the brook dries up. Oh, great. You're like, wow, can this day get any worse, So the Lord tells him to go to this little town of Zarephath, and it's not in Israel, it's outside. And he's supposed to stay with a widow there. And so Elijah begins this amazing journey. It's a great story. And he arrives at the town gate, and Elijah meets this widow, and she's gathering sticks, and he says, would you bring me a little, something to drink and something to eat? She says, look, I'm gathering sticks. I'm going to go home, and we only got a little bit left. I'm going to make a little bit of cake for my son and myself and drink what we have left, and then we're going to die. She's a great widow. I'm telling you, she's really great. We're going to go home and die. All right. And then he says, look, if you do this for me, I guarantee you by God's word, the bread, the flour, and the oil will never run out while I'm with you. And so, against all odds, she decides to take a little faith. Maybe she's like, what have I got to lose? We're going to die anyway. So she does this, and it says in the Bible that the flour and the oil do not run out for 3 years. This is amazing. It's a miracle. So Elijah stays with this widow of Zarephath for 3 years. And then something amazing, you might say, or terrible happens. Her son, apparently the son is young, okay? He gets sick, and then he gets sicker, and she begins to complain to Elijah. Okay, a little more than complain. She starts really yelling at him. Okay, where's he at? She starts whining. What have you got against me, O man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sins and kill my son? And so Elijah's pretty upset. So he takes the little boy upstairs, puts him on his bed. Now it says that he covered him 3 times. I don't know if they had any idea about, doing the compressions and all that kind of stuff. But like the EMS people do, all that kind of thing. But he says to God, oh God, did you send me in all this calamity of this woman? Oh, please, let this life return to this child. I give it back to its mother. And that's exactly what happens. And he takes the boy back downstairs. He's alive, gives him to his mother, and she says, truly, you are a man of God. So, the story of the woman, the boy, and Elijah is very much like the story of Jesus we hear in the New Testament this morning. Jesus is traveling with disciples and a crowd, and he's just healed the servant of the Roman centurion. Pretty big deal. Jesus' disciples are traveling on their missionary journey, and they come to this town of Nain. And they're approaching the city gate, and they come to this funeral procession out of the city. Now, there's a lot in this story. I remember growing up, we had a lot of faith healers and things like that. I don't know if you've ever come across that or on television, put your hand on the television foot and your foot in the bathtub and feel the power, kind of stuff. But anyway, I do believe in faith healing, okay? I do believe in it. But some are not as genuine as others, Some people say there's a special formula you got to follow and all this kind of thing, got to do this, got to do that. I believe in praying for healing, and I have seen amazing healings. But in this story, I want you to notice that nobody asked Jesus for anything. Okay? Jesus heals in many different ways. Sometimes he's asked. Sometimes there's great prayer before, but this time it just simply says that he had compassion. Okay? And he is moved. And he says to the mother, don't cry. He doesn't say have faith or anything like that. He says he goes up and he touches the coffin and says, young man, I say to you, get up. And the young man gets up and talks to Jesus. Now, I just wonder how many people fainted at that moment. Have you ever gone to a funeral and a guy in the casket gets up, sort of thing? It's pretty shaky when that stuff like that happens. Well, in both stories, everyone recognizes the power of God has been present, and that Jesus and Elijah have been sent by God for a special purpose. In both stories, neither person asked for anything, but the goodness and the love and the kindness of God is all on display for everyone to see. Some people say, well, you got to pray the right prayers in the right way and do all this kind of stuff, things like that. But in both these stories, God's love is displayed because that's how God is. God is loving and kind and present and attractive, even in the really hard times that we don't understand. Well, God is active in both lives of the prophet and the widow, and in Jesus and the widow there. And the story got me thinking about the life of Elijah. He was not always brave. He was not always courageous. He was not always the stand-up kind of guy that he usually is, He had times he fell into self-pity. He fell into despair. He's just bad. Even though he had all the gifts that he needed, and it got me thinking that God sent him to the widow at Zarephath for a couple of reasons. First reason was Elijah had a job to do, and God needed him to survive the drought, and he couldn't do this on his own. Elijah had a long way to go in his ministry and mission, and he would need a little support. Now, there's lots of things that the Bible doesn't say. But here's what I think happened. Elijah stayed with the widow at Zarephath for 3 years. Okay, this is where the romantic part comes in. Okay? I'd like to think they eventually got married. Elijah needed somebody. And I was thinking about John Wayne. Okay, in the movie Hondo, one of his famous movies that I was thinking about this little while ago, Hondo is one of the first and probably the most exciting books written by Louis L'Amour. And my dad was a big Louis L'Amour. He had a stack of Louis L'Amour books by his recliner that was that high. Now, the thing about Louis L'Amour was, if Louis L'Amour said there was a spring somewhere in the country, you could go there and the spring would be there. So that was really cool. Dad loved that. When he traveled, he'd find these little things that Louis L'Amour wrote about. And in the opening part of Hondo, and if you want to see it, go to Netflix. I think it's on there. John Wayne comes walking out of the high plains desert. And he's just sunburnt and white, and he's carrying his saddle and all of his gear. His horse died. And he comes walking, he comes on this really far out ranch. And there's a woman there with a young son, and it's obvious their husband has been gone a long time. And Hondo stays with her a few days and gets his act together, buys another horse from her. And the woman finds out that Hondo has been married before to an Apache wife. And she finally asks Hondo, "Did you love her?" She had a husband. I don't think he really loved her. It was a marriage of convenience, And it's one of those scenes, he just looks off in the distance and he says, "I don't know," he said. "I know this. I needed her. I needed her." And I thought about Elijah at that moment in the movie of Hondo, that Elijah needed her. I know that it's a romantic thought that Elijah and the widow, married. There's no doubt that Elijah needed her. Hey, he was there for 3 years, okay? People get bored, saying. You okay back there? Hey, people in the Bible are just people, all right? We serve a compassionate God who knows what we need and when we need things. And many places says, "I know what you need even before you ask for it." When our lives would just fall apart if we didn't get a little support, a little love, a little help. In this time of great trouble with the nation, God cares about the story of two people, their needs, their wants, their hopes, their desires. In the story of the widow of Zarephath, the widow was poor. In the story of the widow of Nain, well, we think that she's much more well-to-do. In both stories, there is life, there is not death. In both stories, there is joy that comes out of sorrow. In both stories, there is praise that comes to God and great worship. When you have those low times of life and you ask yourself, does God really care what's happening to me? I ask you to go to those old stories and reread them and offer them up to God. Maybe you'll find yourself somewhere in the story. God acts in our lives in great and powerful ways that sometimes we don't understand. The passion of God is in your life, in my life. Just be open. Keep praying. And the miracles of God, they happen all around us.